All right. Welcome, everyone. I know, Scarlett, it's still morning time where you are, so I appreciate you being on here. And thank you for everyone for coming and the authors for another Bookstore Romance Day celebration. I know things are terrible right now, but I will say it has made Bookstore Romance Day much easier to plan for readers and authors because we're not limited geographically. Housekeeping stuff. Belmont Books is located in the greater Boston area. We do have several wonderfully signed book plates from authors throughout the entire day. So Scarlett has supplied some signed book plates and stickers. Kate has signed book plates, and yeah. Several of our contemporary romance authors have signed book plates. Priscilla Oliveris, Tosh Skilton, Helena Hunting. So if you place any orders for these lovely romance authors throughout the weekend, you'll get book plates and swag. And we also have a limited number of Indies Love Romance tote bags, which will be placed randomly in orders. So you have that to look forward to. I am joined by Vanessa Riley, Scott Peckham, Kate Bateman, wonderful historical romance authors. I am so excited to talk with them. I will let them introduce themselves in case the names aren't familiar to you. Vanessa, we'll start with you.
Hi, all, and thank you guys for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending upon where you're geographically located. My name is Vanessa Riley. I'm a historical fiction and historical romance author. My current book is, product placement here, A Duke, the Lady, and a Baby. I guess I am known for strong sisterhoods in my book and bringing diversity. So you will see characters that you probably have never read, but are period accurate to the West Indies colonies, where South Africa, India, etc., that were all part of the Regency that we know and love. Just may not have read.
Scarlett.
Hello, I am Scarlett Peckham, broadcasting live from Los Angeles, where the 100-degree heat wave is giving me terrible allergies. So I do apologize if I'm like, this whole time. I'm usually very elegant. But anyway, my latest book is called The Rakess, and it is sort of in keeping with most of my books, which are a little bit saucy and feminist historical romances that often feature alpha and unlikable heroines.
I will say the Raycast was my previous staff pick for April at the bookstore.
Aw, thank you.
Very good. Highly recommend it. So if, in case you haven't read it yet and need just a little nudge to get it, it was my staff pick. I loved it. Kate?
Hello, I'm Kate Bateman. My latest book is To Catch It All, which is in my Bow Street Bachelors series behind. And I write badasses in bodices. I like my heroines all have cool skills, like they're girls that aren't just fainting idiots in ballrooms. So that's my thing. Yeah, that's about it. Historical romance, but they are mainly based on historical fact, like Vanessa says. I mean, there are some amazing historical stuff out there, and most of them sound ridiculous when you put them into a plot and you try and convince your editor that this is really going to be great, but you get away with it. So yeah, most of my plots are based on some element of historical fact. So yeah.
So my first question for all of you is, romance is so varied in terms of subgenre. I always say that if you don't like romance, you just kind of like haven't found your niche yet. So why historical romance for you? Why didn't you go contemporary or paranormal? What made you pick this particular genre of romance? Vanessa, do you want to go first?
Not really, but
okay, no.
On me. I shall.
I feel like drunk with power here.
I know. Speaking of drunk with power, I think when I first read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, the way that she was a contemporary author writing of her time, but it's so timeless. the values that the heroines have, the way they're going and railing against the patriarchy, even in that context of the early 1800s. It just fired something in my imagination that just never stopped. And so my love of history, you know, I'm a mechanical engineer, a doctorate in mechanical engineering, so I can, you know, almost fix your car. Or I can tell people. You don't really want me to do it myself. But that passion never died, and so I'm very fortunate at this point in my life. I can really dig in and bring to light these stories that have always been in my head, and it's really goes back to Jane Austen. So it's all her fault.
Darn. Scarlett?
Well, I grew up reading historical romances by, let's say, I don't know, like I would bring home like 10 to 20 every week at the library during summer break. Like the librarians were like, who is this 11-year-old, but also fine. Her mom doesn't care, I guess I don't care. Yeah, so they were just like, they've always been in my head, and they've always sort of been a comfortable place for me. And then when I became, you know, an adult and I had a corporate job that was very stressful, I started reading them again, because I'd kind of like, you know, not done so much between the time I was like in high school and college and then early 20s. And I was just like, wow, these have evolved so much. And I started thinking about how historical romance sort of reflects the modern era. And I just thought when I started wanting to write one, I was like, wow, what a fascinating tool to sort of, you know, use it as a trick mirror to kind of comment on the modern era through the lens of the past and sort of explore the through lines of them. So yeah, I have a deep-seated or deep-rooted affection for them, but I also like, I think they're just really like intellectually interesting.
Kate?
Wow, I feel like I should follow Scarlett with something deeper than I great. No, my background's history. So I spent 15 years as an auctioneer. So I ran an auction house. So I was seeing all these historical artifacts all the time. And in the art world, we call it provenance. Like the story behind all the things was so fascinating to me. It's kind of way more interesting. And it added all this, like, it's like, what if this happened with this item? And it adds value. And I love the idea. And so I'd grown up reading historical romance. And I'd read a medieval, it was Laura Kinsale, I think, or Judy Garwood, someone like that. And I looked around for something similar, and there really wasn't, because I didn't kind of know that there was this strict 8 years of the Regency where we have to write this, you know, and there's the rest of history is kind of ignored. But that's why I wrote my first book was a medieval, like Italian Renaissance, you know, romp fest, you know, homage to kind of all those old school bodice rippers, just to see if I could do it. But I've read, yeah, I love and read them. I'm a reader first before I was a writer. And then when I moved to the States, I decided that I couldn't auctioneer anything because there's not much here to auctioneer. And I need to do a whole bunch of new exams to learn to do the rules and stuff like that. So I'm super lazy. So I started writing instead of reading. And it's turned out okay. That was like 8 years ago. So it's turned out all right. But yeah, historical romance is my first love.
So yeah. I actually read The Devil to Pay, which you mentioned is my first romance.
Ever, it doesn't bear up well, as many of the older books don't, but yeah.
And I just thought it was interesting. So I am one of the rare historical romance readers where I don't know anything. Like if you asked me to tell you when the Regency era was, I can't. And I don't know, you know, what words are not allowed in historical romance. So you could just throw in whatever and it would go over my head. But I was really taken with like, it's Italian Renaissance and not like Regency era. So why did you pick that for that particular book?
I didn't know any better at the time. So I just read, like, I think it was Shadowheart or something. I was like, I want to read, people can kill each other and it's great and there's all this conflict and, you know, and you can get away with a kind of more of an alpha male back then because that was just the way it was done. But you can also, you know, have heroines who are a bit feisty. And that was why. But you tread such a dangerous line between being historically accurate and being appealing to the modern reader. And it's something I really struggle with. I'm sure the others too as well. I was told, you know, so many people in that, I used the word a magnet, and I used a magnet and a compass in that. And someone said, there weren't any magnets in 1320, and there were, Marco Polo had them in the 1100s, but I'm not about to start a Twitter argument over when magnets were. It's like, okay, I could have called it a lodestone, but it doesn't matter. I don't know, it's a very dangerous thing. So I don't know where I stand on accuracy in historical romance, because we're writing historical fantasy, you know, even though my plots are based on real savers, it's still an escape, and so it's got to be enjoyable as well as mainly historically accurate, right? I mean, we all know there weren't 150 good-looking dukes in the Regency. They're all fat and gouty and into breasts. So at what point are we, you know, suspending our disbelief, you know?
I think there were only 27 and only one was hot.
Yeah.
That's sad. That's sad.
Very sad. 10,000
right
books.
there.
Yeah.
10,000 books. 10,000 different dukedoms have been created.
What if we find out later on that it's been the same duke the whole time? Just like in all romance, just the one.
but Kate, what I learned very quickly to put a detailed author's note in the back of my books so that I could save everybody the Googling.
Yeah.
So that they could see where I'm referencing my characters or the facts that I'm modeling. And that really, you know, made a difference, because some of my favorite reviews have been like, I Googled her and she was correct.
You're like, fancy that.
Yeah.
What?
I did that strategy too in my last book, because it's inspired by Mary Wollstonecraft. Like the whole series is about the fight, well, not the fight, but, you know, the age of rebellion in the UK in the 1790s. And yeah, I was just like, let me head off all of the people who are going to be like, wait a minute, feminism didn't exist. And, you know, yes, Vanessa knows exactly what I'm talking about. Her books are so diverse, and I can only imagine the comments you get about the kind of people, because, you know, we all grew up reading Regency, so a lot of those books are just so white. They're so based in the aristocracy, and that's not how the Regency actually was. And yeah, it's sometimes nice just to be like, hi, this book is based on a lot of research, so let's just dive in here.
What a great segue, because I wanted to ask about research, and when we started the recording, you were all showing your fancy research piles. So I want to know, like, where you usually start with research, and is it like a chicken and the egg scenario? Like, you have the idea and then you dive into the research, or you come across something fascinating in your research and then that gives way to a book. Usually, which way do you think it goes for you?
Typically, well, Scarlett, you go.
No, you can go.
Typically, I have a collection of random ideas, random facts. Like I'll be doing research and I'll be looking for one thing, and I'll come across something entirely different. So I for A Duke, the Lady, and the Baby, I found one of the battle records describing the Marquess of Angles. And sorry, Kate, if I'm totally butchering this. I'm from the South. We mess up all names. Just go put it out there, right? But the Marquess of Angles, he suffers a battle injury and his leg is amputated. And so they literally go through and they talk about this amputation and how a year later he still feels the nerves and all these sorts. And I was like, that is so interesting. And then you read you start doing a deep dive on that, and you find out he was one of the first ones to have a reticulating a prosthetic to help him to walk and everything like that. And then you find more articles about the cat gut and all the sort of stuff they use to make the tendons and to make it. And you're just like, oh my gosh, I gotta use this. And then later on, you're writing a story and you're like, I know who my hero is. So usually you find something, and I'm a collector. I put it in the back of my head, and then a story will come along, and then I'm going to use that.
By the way, I'm in the middle of A Duke, the Lady, and a Baby, and it's like outstanding and very beautiful and so like gorgeously researched. So if you don't have it yet, you might just want to click buy now on the old Amazon.com, or even better, Belmont Books.
Belmont
Forgot where I am. Get it on Belmont Books. Gosh, I'm a monster. I apologize.
Sorry, everyone. Scarlett has to leave. We're going to kick her off. she's getting booted off the island.
It's cruel.
Oh.
Yeah,
Kate, what-
I find it the same in that I'll be looking for something completely different, end up down some 2-day rabbit hole of stupidity, and then think that's the stupidest thing I've ever read, and it can't possibly be true, and it is. And then you're like, I've got to put that in a book. And so yeah, all my books have, you know, one's like a real prison heist, one's like a counterfeiting job to kind of fake currency. I mean, all sorts of stupid. This one, this one of mine was Napoleonic rescue with a submarine. Who knew there were submarines in the Regency? So my wicked brain goes, "Ooh, submarines, that's a really enclosed space. I can put 2 hot people together and smash them together in an enclosed space." So yeah, that's how it happened. And then yeah, this one, the latest was the Catchinell is about the real theft of the French crown jewels, which really happened. And then you do that what if, so there's like some idea that you don't have the answer to, and you're like, well, what if they just, I mean, they did disappear for 30 years. You're like, oh, what happened in that 30 years till they turned up? Could they have been stolen by a female cat burglar? Yes, they could. So yeah, that's where mine comes. It's just random facts that you just spark an idea, and there's so many of them in history, and some don't even make the cut. Like the prison heist book was based on a real account of someone who escaped, but he'd been in prison so long, he trained rats for 3 years to run messages between the cells to him and his friend. And I tried to get that past my editor, and she's like, the rats have to go. No one can believe. I'm like, rats are intelligent creatures. They can carry, she's like, we cannot have the rats. I will give you the tightrope walking out of the prison. The rats carrying messages have to go. I was like, okay, it was a bridge too far, the rats. But everything else is bang on with that prison escape. So yeah. It's all good fun. Thank God for real history. We don't have to make it up. We just add the sexy bits. That's good.
Scarlett, what about your research?
So I start almost all of my books with just like a trope, and how I want to, you know, think about and interrogate and like play with or have just like a joyful, fun time with that trope. And then I sort of from there go to, okay, what kind of character plays into like what I'm trying to do with that premise? And then, like, for example, in the Rake-est, I wanted to do a female rake book. And then I sort of wanted it to be like, she's not a rake because she is like a freewheeling, like, you know, she's not like, she didn't joyfully come to this life. She came to it out of a burning desire to address the double standard between what men get to do and what women get to do in her era. And then I was like, okay, so who is like a person who's sort of similar to this? And then I thought of Mary Wollstonecraft, because she's a person who had this wild life, like absolutely wild. I mean, she traveled to Scandinavia with a baby to search for her lover's lost treasure, and she, you know, she had a child out of wedlock. She had, you know, sadly, like not tons, but several episodes of major what we would not call, you know, a major clinical depression and actually suicide attempts, because her love affairs were so intense, and they sometimes, like, her heart was broken. And then she finally found happiness and had like this kind of work-life balance with her partner, William Godwin, and they were, you know, like so mindful about making sure that Mary could write, but also care for the children. But William, you know, it was just like this very modern arrangement. And then she died in childbirth, which is a very, you know, 18th century phenomenon that we still see now, unfortunately. And she was completely slut-shamed upon her death. Like, all people could talk about is all of this information that unfortunately her husband published in a memoir celebrating her life. But, you know, it was like this woman who was one of the most proto-feminist thinkers in Western culture, who had this tremendous life where she was just living on the outside of all of the conventions of her society, and she pushed like thinking so far ahead of where it was. And then all people remembered about her for the next 100 years was that she was basically like a loose woman who had like all of these affairs, and she was absolutely villainized by people who were trying to repress revolutionary sentiment in the UK. So between taking my premise and then like taking this like inspiration from a real person's life, I kind of mashed them together and came up with the character in my book. And that's kind of usually how it works, like taking a little bit of a biographical sort of like slice of life and then mapping it onto the premise. And I find that very fun and satisfying.
You just like went on this beautiful rant about like deep loves and what she did, and I just thought like, what have I done for my boyfriend lately? I was like, I gave him the last of my onion rings last night. I suppose that's good enough. Like,
very kind.
I won't find his buried treasure in Scandinavia, but I will give him my onion rings. So I want to talk to each of you about common threads that I've seen in your writing, and like why you chose those things. So Kate, your current series deals with like Bow Street and Bow Street runners, and always kind of has, I guess, like a suspenseful element, or like a sort of like cat and mouse scenario. And I'm curious why you went that route and decided to, you know, take the Bow Street runners, which have been kind of a staple in historical romance.
Oh, I don't know. It's what I want to read. I want romance, and I want a bit of a kick-ass adventure. So all the my favorite films and books and stuff, it's like I want the Count of Monte Cristo or the Three Musketeers, but I was like, I want them to be girls, and I want them to all have love affairs, and I want all that kick-assness, but actually with romance in it too. So, you know, and I don't know, Indiana Jones, I want more romance. Like I want all these ships, like even stuff that absolutely does not have couples in it, like Game of Thrones. I'm like, I need all these couples to not die and live happy ever after. So, but still have adventures. So that's where it comes from. I think it's just a desire to do that. I mean, and I like clever women. I mean, we all write clever women, and we all write women who in the pub, but I mean, they sound so modern, but they weren't. You know, women have been, look at Viking shield maidens. They were kick-ass women, and they were hundreds of years ago. I mean, they have existed. They've just been kind of written out. And the same with all the other areas in the world and the different time periods. There are women everywhere doing really amazing stuff and running empires. You know, Eleanor of Aquitaine. You know, women kind of with the power behind the throne a lot of the time. So I just like exploring that and showing that they have agency, but within these certain parameters. So I like as an author, I like the parameters of the historical period, because you know there's some things they can't do. You know, they don't want to get shamed, or if they do, you can break out, and that's a really big conflict. So all those historical kind of rules add to the conflict. Like modern day, you can pretty much do anything you like, and so it's that to me lacks the interest. Like at least in history, you know, you can do some really cool stuff. But yeah, that's just me.
All right, Vanessa. So you mentioned you are known for writing really diverse romances, and one thing that I find really interesting, especially in your new book, is in historical romance as a whole, I feel the notion that Britain colonized so many countries is kind of like in the background and hand waved away, and we don't really kind of get that a lot of people, like dukes and stuff, directly profited from these colonizing and I don't want to say like adventures, that's not like colonizing expeditions. And this book in particular deals with a lot of British colonies and the effects that it has on people who live in that country. And I want to talk about your decision to do that, if you were worried at all, because let's all admit, it is a very white place in romance, and some readers are not exactly welcoming to having those historical facts in front of their face. So I'm just curious about your decision, if you felt any sort of trepidation in writing that, or if you felt welcomed and comfortable writing it and putting it out into the world.
I go back to that most dangerous author that I've ever read, Jane Austen. And I, you know, like I told you, I loved Pride and Prejudice, and I'm reading all of her works, Persuasion, and then I get on to her very last work, Sanditon. And the wealthiest woman in the book is Miss Lamb. Miss Lamb is a mulatto woman from the West Indies. She's a free woman, and some estimates that her fortune is in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. And the book shows men scheming and aunts scheming to marry her off because money trumps race. So there's universal truths, as well as that fact when you find that other person who's supposed to be your other person, race doesn't matter. It's a factor. It changes the lens of how you look at things and how you appreciate things and the culture that you're bringing to the table. But people are people and hearts are hearts. And so I want to show that. My research has shown there was so much migration in the West Indies. If you had a mixed race child, you wanted the best for that child. And you knew that education in England would be the route, as well as marriage in England. So you find a lot of circumstances where people are sending their children to Scotland and Ireland and the UK. Hence why Jane Austen, a contemporary author, showcases Miss Lamb in her very last book. And so what I'm doing is not new. Is I go through all this. It's not new. It's just that it hasn't, at some point, someone decided that readers didn't want to see this. They didn't want to read these types of things. And so you get a very different formula. Nothing wrong with the books. Trust me, if you could see my shelves, I've got plenty. I just like now that there is room for the table for all stories. Because at one point, we've all heard the saying, the sun never set on England. Why is that? It's because they had colonies everywhere, in Africa, in India, in the West Indies. And there's such blending of peoples and people's experiences that it needs to be showcased. Next year, I've got a book coming out. It's my first historical fiction with William Morrow, talking about Dorothy Kirwan Thomas, another haphazard find that I found. But this particular woman, she ends up paying her own freedom and for that of her family. She ends up becoming one of the wealthiest women in the West Indies. She has an affair with Prince William Henry, the future William IV. So Meghan and Harry weren't the first. Right? And then she goes on, because there's so many women of color in the colony of Demerara that are gaining economic freedom, that the men in power get worried, and they try to do taxation on just these Black women to pay for the rebellions and pay for things. And she literally goes to England, gussies herself up, and gets a meeting with the Secretary of War and the colonies. And her argument with him leads him to abolish the taxes. So she's like a feminist. She has these wonderful affairs. She's just a woman out of her time, and she's been completely erased from the landscape. Those are the kind of women that I think everybody can root for, can feel for, and it just enriches the entire landscape. And I'm excited that there's now room at the table for all stories.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm also super excited about that book. I think William Morrow also does Chanel Cleaton's Once Upon a Time, or was it Last Year in Havana, which are also very good historical fiction novels as someone who was born in South Florida. So I highly recommend those. Scarlett, we're going to talk about your books, specifically your heroines. I always find it interesting the characterizations you give your heroines and how, I don't want to say unique they are, but I remember the first book I read where your heroine was an amateur botanist. And I'm just kind of in awe a little bit about how you put these really interesting tidbits into your characters, and they just work so well. So I really want to talk about how you manage to balance those characteristics in a way that I feel like everyone can not necessarily root for, but get on board with.
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying before about mashing up a premise slash trope that I really want to explore, and then figuring out what is a way to make this sort of plausible in terms of what was possible, like literally possible for women in that era. And then how can I use the character profile that I want to put in this trope? So for instance, you're talking about The Duke I Tempted, which was my first book, and the character Poppy, she's actually not an amateur botanist. She's a professional botanist slash gardener. And the whole premise of the book is that she has this business she has been fighting for her entire life. Like, she has put everything she has into trying to use her little patch of land and her natural and inherited gifts for understanding botany, because her mother was an amateur botanist, and so she sort of learned it and then she turned it into a trade. And all she wants, because she's constantly been at the beck and call and dependent on the whims of men, because she's never had a private fortune, and she was orphaned at a young age. So it's sort of like her whole life, everything that has driven her destiny has been controlled by things that she is literally not allowed to have a stake in. And so all she wants is to use this trade that she has developed for herself to have self-determination, to not be dependent on any man, to build up this business. And the reason I wanted a character who was both fiercely covetous of having this thing that we all take for granted now, but also kind of able to establish it for herself, because there's a long, long history of women using their knowledge of plants to either become like illustrators for botanical textbooks, or, you know, healers who use herbal medicine in places where there aren't a lot of doctors, or in fact, you know, professional botanists and gardeners. So that was extremely, you know, plausible, and I could root her in a time and place and do a ton of research on the botany trade. And then also come up with the great conflict, because The Duke I Tempted is a marriage of convenience story, and it plays with power dynamics between like the marriage of convenience stories that I grew up with, where, you know, you sort of often have like people who sort of on the surface don't really want to be together, but then, or even like they don't mind each other, but they're sort of mashed up and then they fall in love. So I wanted to make it a book where one person just like the last thing in the entire world that she would want, like literally she would rather like not die, but like pretty much like this is her worst nightmare, is having to basically become dependent on a man and sign her life away. Like, she loses her name, she loses her ability to contract trade, like to enter contracts under her own name, because she's now married to a man, and therefore under the laws of couverture, she is basically the same person as him legally, but like she's him, right? Like, she's erased in terms of her ability to be a functioning citizen in the society. So this is like her worst nightmare. And then when she enters this marriage, it's like a literal nightmare. And so these people, the Duke, it's a Duke book. The Duke also, for his own traumatic backstory reasons, like hates the idea of getting married. And so the fact that she hates it is why he wants her to marry him. But she's even then like, God, no, like you are out of your mind. And it isn't until she absolutely has no other alternative, because she's going to lose her business that she spent her entire life working for, that she says yes. And then the book kind of spirals into this very angsty, kind of nightmarish time where they're trying so hard to like figure out how their attraction to each other can find a balance with how they're repelled by the situation that they're in. So to me, like the psychological profile of Poppy and her husband Archer is like, yes, we take in things from the botany trade, and then we also just take in like psychological truths, and we take in my personal like fascination with how romance novels often like are right on the cusp, like the premises are on the cusp of nightmare and fantasy, you know, like they're almost like fairy tales. Like some of the tropes, it's like I would die if this happened to me in real life. Like a marriage of convenience when it would like destroy everything I've ever cared about. No, thank you. So it's just like, what is it like to be in that headspace, and how do you try to like make the best of it? And yeah, so all of my characters are basically like, let's see what it would feel like to actually live in that trope, and then how do we find a character who fits in the dynamics of that trope in a way where it's interesting to explore how they might feel. And then from there, like making sure there's enough historical context and enough reality that I can actually do research on and pull from living people and the actual dynamics of the societies in which they lived, where the whole thing feels grounded in truth, and then can, you know, sort of reflect on both psychology and the time that they're living in, but also like the through line to the time that we have now.
I have
spiel.
So I have one last question for myself before we will open it up to the audience. If you could write like your dream book, and you don't have to worry about a book deal or who's going to buy it or marketability or anything, you know it's going to be a success no matter what you do, what is the plot or story or element that you really want to put into a book or write about? Feel free to take your time and mull this one over.
I have to say, like, I began publishing in indie, and I basically wrote a book that had like so much trauma at the heart of it. And
yeah. You did.
And like a submissive Duke, and the whole thing is premised around kink, and the Duke is sexually submissive, but it's like his deep dark secret, and then it goes from there into other forms of kink and stuff. And to me at the time, that was like the wild thing that I wanted to write and I wanted to see in historical romance. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna write it. And then it didn't sell, so I published it as an indie book, and like it was wildly fun and exciting. And I actually think that now, like, it's much, I think if you were to ask me this question 5-10 years ago, like it would be much easier for me to conceive of a book that I would be too scared to write. But now that I can write a book and just publish it myself, I don't have a lot of fear about that anymore.
Is there like an idea you've been kicking around in your head that you would want to write about eventually?
Yeah, I have an idea for like Georgian witches where they use sex magic to
yes, please write it immediately.
Power activist causes through like their like orgasmic rituals, and then that is 100% what I'm planning to do after I finish the Charlotte.
Oh my god!
But that's going to be probably self-published.
That's fine. I'm all here for Georgian witches using sex magic. It's only 12:40, and I don't know how I'm going to top this the rest of the day.
on a slightly different note.
No sex magic for you.
No, I love the premise of Dangerous Liaisons, where there is like a deep-seated bet going on, and you have the so it's almost like there's two sets of hero heroine in the book, because you've got the two that have the bet going on, and then the other people's lives that are being played with throughout the book. So if you see that, that's my catnip. So there'll be a something with that whole premise of Dangerous Liaisons.
That's a good idea. I will also throw my money at that one as well, Vanessa. Kate, what have you got?
Yeah, it tends to be the indie stuff that you know. I mean, the next series I'm writing for my publisher is actually one I've always wanted, which was like, I pitched it as Hatfields and McCoys, but in the Regency, and it's the England-Wales border, and it's two families that have hated each other for like 500 years, and I just love the inherent trope in that of just absolutely hating each other. But no one can even remember what it's about. It's just, you will hate these people forever, and of course they're going to fall in love. So that's kind of fun for my thing. But I'm in an anthology that was traditional baddies. So I actually pitched, mine was going to be the Dangerous Liaisons, but with happy endings. But it's like, I switched it to, it's going to be Milady de Winter, because I wanted in the Three Musketeers, and that's a great trope because they're married but they're apart, and she's a murderess, and how can you redeem her? And I've got no time to write this book. It's never going to happen unless I like have like 10 weeks in quarantine without my children. But I just like that idea of those kind of people that have traditionally been seen as baddies, like the Disney villainesses. They're the way most interesting people in the whole. Who wants a princess? They're boring. I want I want Ursula's story. I want all those really cool like Greek mythology heroines and stuff. So I do something like that. I do like, I don't know, Ages of Persephone or some kind of weird, fabulous, dark, twisty fairy tale myth, or Cupid and Psyche is a great one. I'd love to do that, where he visits her at night in the dark and she doesn't know it's him, but in the day he's a bear or something, and in the day, like, there are so many cool things I do. There's not
only in romance. It's like he'll visit you at night as a man, and then but during the day he's a bear.
That's like that's like a fairy tale, like a Russian fairy tale, isn't it? Like East of the Sun, no, not East of the Sun, West of the Moon. There's a fairy tale with that trope where he's a bear and then you've got to, but then it's like a Cupid and Psyche thing where she wakes up and she ruins it and then she has to go off and find him again because she found his gorgeous man in the, I'd take it. I'd take a hot guy in the dark and a bear in the day. I mean, you don't have to talk to them all day. It'd be great, you know.
You get your work done during the day.
Yeah, get your work done.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will relay them to the authors. That's fascinating. I would read all of those books.
Same.
I hope you all get a chance to write them sometime.
Oh, somebody said The Sea Witch, and someone said Lady Hawk. Yes, I've got to rewatch that as well.
Lady Hawk is such a good movie.
I'm trying to show my children all these classics. I made them watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is not held up well, but still history.
Will you be seeing the new one, Kate?
I don't think I've seen the second one, and it wasn't as I remembered it, but I've made them watch. Yeah, Lady Hawk is next. They've seen The Princess Bride, which is a standard they have to watch.
Well, something tells me you don't really have to watch the Bill and Ted movies in order. Something tells me there's not much continuity you have to worry about.
That's true. Yeah.
What are you all reading right now? Anything very good?
I just finished
Vanessa's book.
Well, Vanessa's book is next on my list. I just finished Evie Dunmore's Bringing Down the Duke, which was brilliant, and that's so cool because it's Victorian, and that was really fab. But normally I can't read historical when I'm writing historical, so I tend to read like something stupid like paranormal or anything else when I'm not. So now I'm supposed to be writing, but I've got like 2 weeks off in which I'm going to read everything I can. So yeah, that was it. It was yeah, I guess Vanessa's is next actually. Is that or some really, really dark, it was oh, who's it? Madeline Miller, the Circe and the
Circe, Song of Achilles.
Yeah, Song of Achilles is
so
next
good.
well. Yeah, I've been waiting.
Vanessa, what are you? They're worth the wait.
Yeah, I usually do 2 books at once. So I just did Julia Quinn's First Comes Scandal, and I'm also doing Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half.
Oh, that one is
I
also
love that
very
one.
good.
So good.
So Mina asks if it was difficult to find the real stories that inspired any of your books.
Yes, sort of, but not that hard. I tend to read like wide-ranging cultural histories of the era in which I'm writing sort of first, which usually gives you some breadcrumbs to follow. Like a person will be mentioned in passing as an example of someone who did something, and then you can go down a sort of rabbit trail of, looking through JSTOR, the sort of academic database of papers people have written on more niche subjects in history. You can look at academic texts. Sometimes you have to get out of date ones that aren't in print anymore, but you can usually find them, or sometimes they're just on like Google Books for free. Yeah, I mean, it's not like if you want to write about something that isn't just like a very well-known sort of person in history, like Mary Wollstonecraft was not hard to find information about. The book Romantic Outlaws, by the way, is where I got a lot of my most urgent inspiration. And so that was not hard at all. Finding like examples of, I don't know, like a botanist in 1750 was a little bit harder. But yeah, it's not impossible. It's just you have to do a little bit of like legwork.
Yeah. I love art. So I look at political cartoons of the day, newspaper clippings of the day, because there's always, like Scarlett saying, there's all these little nuggets, and it's like, well, what is this? And then you start doing research on this, and you look up, you may find some diary entries, you may find all these different transcriptions. Old Bailey's is another one. I love going through the criminal files because you can find some of the most fascinating things. Like there was one guy, he was charged for stealing a Bible, but it was in a crate and it had fallen off of a wagon, and they proved that he found it on the side of the road, so he was cleared of charges. But it was just you just find these little nuggets everywhere, and for me, I'm a collector, so I put it in the back of my head, and sooner or later it comes out someplace.
Do you keep these like organized in a document, or you just rely on your own brain power, Vanessa?
No, my brain is tired. So I use Scrivener, and I have like the research section in Scrivener has detailed tabs, so I can go back. Oh, I need a Regency food. Boom. Things like that. Yeah.
So Kelly asks how you are all surviving quarantine. Are you baking, crafting, and how have you been finding inspiration to write during these kind of difficult circumstances?
It's been tough. This is my office. This is my writing space, and I have been kicked out of it. I've moved upstairs because my husband is now working from home till October, and my 3 children are now doing virtual school in their bedrooms. So, yeah, it's been a challenge. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it's tough, but we all have our own space. I mean, I'm very lucky that we don't all have to share one computer or one bedroom, so it's not been that bad. You just kind of lock your door, and it is a room of your own, right? You need this space, even if it's like a corner of one desk that's yours, and I have a wall of crazy with my plots on, and I don't know, it's like, you know, serial killers have all those walls with bits stuck on the thing. That's my plotting process. But so long as I've got that little corner and I can do it, I'm okay. So now they're back at school, it should be theoretically I get 8:30 till 3 quiet with nobody interrupting, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Scarlett?
Oh,
Scarlett.
sorry.
That's fine.
I said Kelly, and I was like, I'm very hard of hearing. Like, I have hearing aids. It's quite serious, so apologies. Yeah, I have been doing a lot of diamond painting. I don't know.
Oh boy.
It's like the only thing that like relaxes me. Like,
My mother's gotten into diamond painting.
What's that?
I please hold.
Yeah.
I will show you what she has sent me in the mail.
please do.
Continue with your diamond painting.
Well, I've been working through Van Gogh. I'm doing the sunflowers right now. Very relaxing. I've also commissioned, there's this piece of art I saw at like a modern exhibition when I went to a ballet that was also at a gallery back like right before we couldn't do anything anymore. And I was like, whoa, that would make such a good diamond painting. So then I like this company in China to do like I am in deep. So sort of things like that where I can just like do mindless activities that sort of, sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook as well, which is very fun, or like podcasts. But in terms of working, I have not been terribly prolific. Like I tend to write books that are extremely like angsty and gothic, and they cover really dark themes. And it just feels like life is extremely that right now. Like all the things that are going on, like COVID, all of the terrible, terrible, like racial violence we've seen, like it is just a really difficult time to live in the world, but to me particularly like America right now. So yeah, I don't know, it's been heavy. It's been really heavy. And I actually started writing like I a couple of friends and I have always like talked about how wouldn't it be fun to write a rom-com together, and we all like, one of them lives in Scotland and I live in LA, and we were like, I wonder if we could do it on like Google Hangouts, you know, before the pandemic. And then now everything is like virtual. So we've actually been able to do it. But I'm ramping it back. Like I'm starting to write my actual romance novels right now, but it just took a long time to like process and get my brain back into a place where it felt feasible to do that.
Also, this is my mom's latest diamond painting she has sent me.
Oh my God, a Technicolor cat. Love.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Please give her my compliments.
I was like, Mom,
That's
what
one
am I
of her
going to
colleagues in the
do
field.
with this? She's like, I don't know, hang it up or something. It's like,
Frame it. You have to put that in a frame.
But is it tiny little diamonds? Are you putting tiny little, is each piece like a diamond?
it's like a little gem, kind of like a little gemstone almost.
Like a Swarovski crystal or something like that?
I wouldn't, it's not that fancy, but.
Plastic. And they're kind of like, I don't know, they're
like pyramid shaped.
yeah, pyramid
You
shaped, so
glue
they
them-
reflect light, and then you use this teeny tiny little like pen to put them on something that's basically like paint by number except with tar paper. Stick them on. It's just so it's very soothing for me.
That stuff is great though, because I was going through my art supplies to put like for one of the kids, and I came across, I found I had some gold leaf squares from like redoing a frame, and my brain is so weird. I was like, ooh, I could gold leaf my fingernails. So I'm currently looking.
Yeah.
I want to do it properly because I don't just want to put like sticky varnish and gold leaf. I want to do the whole like bowl. You need this kind of weird stuff underneath. I want the bowl, and I want proper, and I want to buff them. I will post it on Instagram if I get around to it this weekend, because that's my next project. Is going to be like proper gold leaf. Because, you know, what else are we going to do in quarantine except gold leaf our fingernails, right? I mean,
Vanessa, how are you finding writing at the moment?
Well, unfortunately, I've been under deadline, and
Ooh.
I have the fear of missing deadline, so that really keeps me, you know, chopping through. And the other thing is, I have this air fryer, and it is kind of like, what can I make in it today, right? So I did a whole Thanksgiving meal in the air fryer. So it's like, you know, can I do biscuits in the air fryer? Can I do a pie in the air fryer? I'm just like, just come up with something to do in the air fryer, because it doesn't heat up your entire house. Because like, you know, you have your oven. It heats up, it's the summertime. I'm in the South. We don't want to heat up the entire oven.
No.
But that doggone air fryer, I'm like, let's come up with something. You just random things.
I feel like 2 years ago it was the Instant Pot. Now it's the air fryer. So Les
convinced me. I've been on the fence about it, but
get it.
because I'm vegetarian and my husband's vegetarian, so it seems like there's a lot of potential to do like.
I roasted vegetables in it.
Yeah, you see.
So I took frozen vegetables, because that's how lazy I was, right? So I took frozen vegetables and I sauteed. I just took some olive oil and just really coated them really well in olive oil and seasoned them, and then put them in the air fryer basket. And they caramelized a little bit on the outside, and they were frozen. And it just cooked heat. It was perfect. It was perfect. So
Vanessa, the chat wants you to put out an air fryer cookbook now.
We may do this. Something like that.
Book with the Duke, someone suggested.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big foodie. I mean, even in the current book, you're going to get the coconut bread recipe, which is to die for. I haven't done that one yet in the air fryer, but I'm gonna.
So Leslie asks, so Vanessa has talked about how Jane Austen are the texts that sort of framed who she was as a historical writer. And I'm wondering if there are other texts, literary, historical, critical, theatrical, whatever, that you think of as almost a base guide for how you think as a writer, or the way you tend towards tropes.
Yes, I can answer this because I did French and English literature at university, and it was white men talking about women who always either got shamed or died, and I got so fed up of it. It was literally every time I was like, step away from the train, Anna Karenina, or put down the poison, Lady Bovary, you know, it's like ridiculous. So I was like, no, these women are going to have a happy ending, which is why all the time I was doing this serious, proper literature, I was also reading like 500 Harlequins at the weekend. And, you know, because that was the antidote to all this heavy, like, I mean, I love Dostoevsky, I love it. I've read all the classics, but I also want people to be happy, because most of the world is about people being happy. And there's enough horrible stuff happening in this world. They don't need me to add to that literature canon of misery. So I want people, you know, getting up off the train tracks and running off with Vronsky and living happy ever after. So that is my manifesto of, like, it's not white men writing white, and I know I'm a white woman writing white women, and I am so glad that historical romance is expanding into all these fascinating, rich, amazing stories. And I'm gutted that I can't write them, but I absolutely want to read more of them by own voices, because how much more interesting is the world if we all read that? Sorry, that's my, you know. I want gay people, there were black people, it's ridiculous. I want those awesome stories, and they all had great adventures and love stories, and I want to read them. So write them, people.
They're existed in all, you know, like the new scholarship, like a lot of the framing that we think of repression during the Regency, early Victorian, it's not that way at all. You know, now I take that back. There are some with the Almacs that are very, you know, lockstep and condemning, but you get into some communities. I just recently read a diary excerpt of a farmer. I think he was in Kent or something like this, and they were talking about a sodomy trial, and he was talking about, you know, like it's a natural occurrence of having this relationship. And this is a farmer in early 1804, you know, something like this. And this is what the new research, new scholarship is seeing. So it's like the world was a lot more open than what we think. And it's a very exciting time.
Well, and historically, has anyone, I've read, you know, Mary Renault, that did like Bull from the Sea and things like that. Persian Boy, that's classic. It's like Alexander the Great had 2 wives, and he had male lovers, and he had, like, I mean, it's so normal back in the Grecian times, you know, and the Roman times, and then it's kind of history has kept repressing and then getting freer again the whole time. So it's fascinating. At least we're coming back around to kind of more interesting times again, hopefully. Yeah.
Scarlett, what about you? Any formative texts?
Yeah, so I've definitely spent a lot of time thinking through how to do kind of a Wuthering Heights / like Jane Eyre sort of vibe in my Charlotte Street series. Not so much to like correct them as to sort of make the things that are so transgressive subtextually sort of on the page too. But, you know, like the power dynamics that those authors are playing with are so interesting to me. And I was like, okay, how would it be interesting to sort of do that vibe, but put everything on the surface, like rather than it being subtextual, just make it like power exchange using kink and negotiations between people on the page, and like wrestling with these concepts in long, probably somewhat boring speeches. But some of my books are more specifically, like my book, The Earl I Ruined, is like totally inspired by Emma.
I feel like that one has been one of the more divisive books you've written.
Yeah, I don't know why, actually. I thought it was like, I don't know, like fun. Like it's fizzy and light and frothy. I mean, it still has a little bit of that like dark edge, but it's definitely like way lighter than all my other books. And that's because like it's sort of taking this character who is sort of like a spin-off of Emma. Like she's constantly trying to arrange the world to her satisfaction and trying to set people up and just basically mucking around in their lives. And I think she's doing it because poor Emma, like that's all she had to do. Like she had nothing to do. She was so bored. And so I was like, okay, like let's give an Emma-like character like a job. Like, let's not have her marry this like sort of boring guy who she's never really been that into. Like, let's give her like this lovely, joyful, I don't know, partner that sort of plays off her sort of mischievous, like slightly wicked energy. Yeah, so The Earl I Ruined is more like if I were to rewrite the dynamics of Emma, but like do it in a way that I find would be more healthy to her obvious like ADHD and like, you know, like complete boredom manifesting as a desire to control the world because she has nothing else to control. Yes. So.
Have you read Jane Steele by Lindsay Faye?
No.
It's like a retelling of Jane Eyre, but if Jane became a serial killer and murdered terrible men.
Oh God. I want to do one like that for Test of the D'Urbervilles. Like,
yes. Oh, yes.
The person that should have. Yes. Don't start me. I can't read the end. Don't start me.
So I highly recommend Jane Steele. That one was wild. It was a lot of fun.
You have it at Belmont Books?
We probably do.
All right, I'm gonna look for it.
That was perfect. That was perfect.
Well, I think that is the end of our event. I know both Scarlett and Vanessa have later events during the day. So if you cannot get enough of them, they will be busy all day. Vanessa, do you remember what you're doing later today?
Not really.
I know.
But I know it's at 2:00. If you go to my website, the events page has everything because I know I'm doing a love connection.
Ooh.
And then some more, hopefully brilliant conversation.
Mina says she thinks you're doing an event with Sonali Dev later.
Yes, thank you, Mina. Thank you. It was a late night.
And both Vanessa and I are doing a conversation hosted by Creating Conversation Bookstore, which is at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern with Olivia Waite and Christina Britton and one more person. Who is it? Someone else who's fabulous. But yes, all of the information is also on Vanessa because I am too lazy to put it on my website.
And then just a reminder, Scarlett and Kate have signed book plates that they have mailed to the bookstore. So if you order any of their books, you will get a signed book plate.
I'll send
and
you some.
extra.
I forgot.
Vanessa will also send some.
On deadline, she's busy.
She's a busy woman. And we also have tote bags, which will be placed in random orders. And then at 3, Belmont Books has a fantasy and sci-fi romance panel with TJ Klune, CL Polk, and Kit Roca. And then at 6 p.m., we have a contemporary romance panel with Farah Haran, Alicia Rai, Priscilla Oliveris, and Tosh Skilton. So it's a day of romance. I'm so excited. It was so lovely to talk to the 3 of you. I hope your book sales are plenty and your events go well. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having
us. It's been so much fun.
Yes.
It's been really nice. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.